The night I met Eli, I was running from a life that no longer fit. At 28, I burned through cities Chicago, Miami, Denver, chasing a freedom I couldn't name, a pulse I could feel but never hold. Austin was my latest stop, a city alive with neon-lit bars and music spilling into the streets, echoing the restless hum inside me. I'm Liam, a bartender who's never stayed anywhere long enough to call it home. I love loud, my laugh, my music, the way I move through a room, daring the world to keep up. But beneath the noise, there's a hollow ache, a heart too big for the spaces I've tried to fit into. That night, I was behind the bar at a downtown dive, pouring whiskey and trading quick banter with the regulars. The place was packed, the air thick with chatter and the low thrum of a guitar from the corner stage. I felt alive, slinging drinks, catching eyes, letting the chaos carry me. Then I saw him lead sitting at the far end of the bar, nursing a glass. He was 32, a contractor, his hands rough from work, his posture steady in a way that cut through the blur of the crowd. He didn't demand attention, yet his presence held weight. Like a stone dropped in a rushing stream, I slid a fresh drink his way without being asked. "You look like you're thinking too hard for a Friday," I said, leaning on the counter, my grin sharp but easy. He looked up, eyes locking onto mine, steady and unhurried. "Maybe I am," he said, his voice low, carrying a Texas drawl that felt rooted deep in the earth. "What's your excuse for working this late?" I shot back, wiping the counter, though it didn't need it. "Mostly." His lips twitched a half-smile that felt earned. We talked between orders. Small things at first, the kind of talk that fills space without asking too much. He worked construction, liked quiet mornings, preferred back roads over city streets. I told him about pouring drinks in different cities, how I'd landed in Austin on a whim, chasing a vibe I couldn't explain. The bar emptied slowly. But he stayed, his glass long empty, eyes still on me. Near closing, I slipped on a patch of spilled ice, my tray clattering, and his hand caught my wrist, steadying me. His grip was warm and firm, lingering just a beat longer than necessary. "Careful," said, his voice soft but sure, his fingers brushing mine as he let go. That touch sparked something, a pull I hadn't felt in years, a heat that lingered as I locked up the bar. He was waiting outside when I stepped into the humid night. Leaning against a truck parked under a flickering streetlight. "Live far?" he asked, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to wait for a stranger. "Not far," I said, nodding toward my motorcycle parked nearby. "You close enough," he replied, eyes catching mine again. That same steady gaze. "I'm Liam," I said, feeling the weight of my own name settle between us. We didn't plan to meet again. But Austin's small enough that paths cross when they're meant to. A week later, I moved into a new apartment. A quiet spot just outside downtown. When I pulled up with my bike and a duffel bag, I saw him againly stepping out of a truck across the street. Keys jangling softly. "You following me?" I called, half teasing, half hoping. He chuckled, crossing the street with an easy stride. "Looks like you're the one moving into my neighborhood." That was the start. We fell into a rhythm without trying. Coffee on his porch at dawn, his truck idling as we talked about nothing and everything. He told me about growing up in a small Texas town where expectations were heavy and softness wasn't allowed. I shared pieces of my own story, being kicked out at 17 when my parents found out I was gay, bouncing from city to city, learning to carry my heart without letting it break. Our mornings turned into late-night rides. My bike leading, his truck following, the city lights blurring past us. Eli was different from anyone I'd known. Where I was fire-quick and bright, he was solid, grounded like stone. His caution showed in the way he scanned rooms before relaxing, the way he kept some stories locked tight. But when his hand brushed mine, or his knee pressed against mine as we sat close, I felt something unspoken, Gronja, quiet thread pulling us together. I didn't know then how fragile that thread could be, how much the world could press against it. The weeks after meeting Eli felt like catching my breath for the first time in years. I'm Liam, 28, a bartender who's always moved too fast to settle. But with Eli, time slowed just enough to feel real. Austin's hum late-night tacos, buzzing bars, Open roads still fueled me. But it was the quiet moments with him that started to matter most. We carved out a rhythm, not forced, just natural. Like the city's pulse had synced with ours, mornings began on his porch, coffee steaming between us as the sun crept up. Eli would sit, one leg stretched out, hands steady around his mug, listening as I rambled about the chaos of last night's shift or some dive bar I'd discovered. He shared stories too, his voice low and deliberate tales of building houses with his hands, long drives through Texas hills where no one could find him. He grew up in a small town an hour from Austin, where his father's voice carried rules that left no room for questions. "You don't talk back. You don't step out of line," he said once, his thumb tracing the mug's rim. I could feel the weight of it, the years he'd spent carrying expectations that didn't fit. I opened up too, more than I usually did. I told him about being 17, my parents finding a letter I'd written to a boy I liked, their faces hardening as they told me to leave. I'd been running ever since, city to city, job to job, never letting anyone close enough to see the cracks. But with Eli, I didn't feel the need to hide. His quiet steadiness made it easy to let the words spill out. Our hands would brush as we passed the coffee pot, or our knees would touch as we sat close, each small contact feeling like a step toward something unspoken. We started riding together, my motorcycle cutting through Austin's edges, his truck trailing behind. He chose back roads he knew from years of escaping the city's noise. One evening, we stopped at a clearing just past the city limits, the sky wide and streaked with orange. He leaned against his truck, passing me a cold drink from a small cooler. "This is where I come when I need to think," he said. "Gaze on the horizon." I nodded, feeling the quiet settle around us, the kind that didn't need filling. Our shoulders brushed as we stood there, the warmth of him steady beside me. I wanted to ask what he was thinking, but the silence said enough. Eli carried a caution I didn't at first understand. He'd scan a diner before sitting, shoulders tensing if someone stared too long. Once at a gas station, a guy called out, "You two together or what?" Half joking, half sharp. I laughed it off, but Eli's jaw tightened, his hand dropping from the pump. Later, he told me about his father's church, the sermons that condemned people like us, the way he'd learned to keep parts of himself hidden. "It's not you," he said, voice low, as we sat on my apartment steps. "It's just, I've spent a long time being careful." I reached for his hand, fingers lacing through his. "You don't have to be careful with me," I said, squeezing gently. His grip tightened back for a moment, and I saw something soften in his eyes, like he was starting to believe it. Our nights grew longer, conversations stretching into the early hours. He'd show up after my shifts, waiting by my bike, and we'd ride to a 24-hour taco stand, splitting plates under flickering lights. He laughed more now, shoulders loosening, stories flowing easier. I told him about the time I crashed a bike in Miami, walking away with nothing but a bruised ego. He shook his head, grinning. "Your trouble?" he teased, nudging my foot under the table. I nudged back, feeling the heat of his leg against mine. The pull between us growing stronger. One Saturday, he knocked on my door, holding 2 helmets. "Thought I'd try your way today," he said, tossing one to me. We spent the morning on my bike, him behind me, hands steady on my waist as I showed him how to lean into turns. He was a quick learner, grip firm but calm. When we stopped at a quiet stretch of road, he laughed, breathless, hands still resting on my hips. "Didn't think I'd like it this much," he said, voice warm, breath close. I turned to face him, our faces inches apart, and for a second I thought he might close the gap. He didn't, but his hand lingered, and that was enough. We were building something piece by piece. Coffee rides, quiet nights where our hands found each other, without asking. I could still feel the edges of his caution, the way he held parts of himself back, as if waiting for the world to remind him why he should. I didn't push. I didn't ask for more than he was ready to give. I just kept showing up, hoping he'd see that this us was worth stepping out of the shadows for. The rhythm Eli and I had built felt like it could carry us forever. Coffee at dawn rides through Austin's quiet edges, hands brushing in the dark. I'm Liam, 28, a bartender who's never known how to stay still. But with Eli, I'd started to believe in something steady, At 32, he was my anchor. His contractor's hands grounding me in a way I hadn't known I needed. But even anchors can shift when the ground beneath them treads. It started with Caleb, Eli's old friend from his small-town days. They'd grown up sharing summers and secrets, the kind of bond that survives time. Caleb was in town for a week, and Eli wanted me to meet him. "He's good people," Eli said, his voice steady but careful as we walked to a backyard barbecue hosted by a neighbor. I trusted him, so I went, expecting an easy afternoon of smoked ribs and cold drinks. The barbecue was alive, music humming, laughter spilling across the yard. Eli stayed close, his arm brushing mine as we grabbed plates. Caleb was all charm, tall and lean, handshake firm, grin sharp. We swapped stories about Austin's best spots and Eli's old truck breaking down adventures. But when Eli's arm settled around my shoulder, casual and sure, Caleb's eyes narrowed just a fraction. "Didn't know you were so close," he said, tone light, but edged like a blade hidden in a smile. Eli's arm stiffened, then dropped. I felt the air shift, a crack forming in the warmth we'd built. Later, as we cleaned up plates, Eli was quiet, hands moving too fast. I pulled him aside, the hum of the party fading behind us. "What's up?" I asked, voice low. He rubbed the back of his neck, gaze on the ground. Caleb's not used to this. Me being open. I waited, letting him find the words. He told me about his past, his father's cold silence when he came out at 20. The church that turned him away, friends who stopped calling. Caleb was one of the good ones, he said. But even he had lines he didn't cross. I wanted to help Eli heal, to show him he didn't have to hide. So I pushed him to come with me to Austin's Pride, meant a street festival bursting with color and music. "It's not about proving anything," I said, my hand on his arm. "It's about being free for a day." He hesitated, jaw tight, then nodded. The festival was electro-cranbow flags, laughter, people holding hands without fear. Eli relaxed as we walked, fingers brushing mine, then linking tentative, but real. For a moment, I thought we'd crossed a threshold. Then it happened. A stranger with a phone snapped a photo of us locked, Eli's smile unguarded. I didn't think twice. Pride was full of cameras. But the next day, the photo was online, tagged with Eli's name, shared on a local group's page. His phone buzzed with notifications, coworkers, old acquaintances, even his father. At the construction site, he caught whispers. Eyes lingering too long, they didn't say much. He told me later, voice flat as he sat on his porch steps. But I felt it. Like I'm not one of them anymore. Tried to reach him to pull him back. "You don't owe them anything," I said, hand reaching for his. He pulled away just an inch, but it stung like a mile. "It's not that simple, Liam," he said, voice heavy. "This is my life, my work. I can't just—" He trailed off, and the silence said enough. He was retreating, folding back into the caution he'd spent years unlearning. The next week was a slow bleed. Eli stopped joining me for rides. His texts short and late. I'd see his truck in the driveway, but he wouldn't come over. I'd wait on my steps, hoping for the sound of his boots on gravel. But the night stayed quiet. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected, not because he was gone, but because he'd chosen to hide, letting the weight of the world pull him from me. I'd spent years fighting to be seen, to be enough. And now the person I'd let in was turning away. One night, saw him at the corner store grabbing a drink from the cooler. I walked up to him, chest height. "You're avoiding me," I said, not softening the words. His shoulders tensed, hand pausing on the bottle. "I'm not," he said, but his eyes didn't meet mine. "I just need time." I stepped closer, voice low but sharp. "Time for what?" "To decide if I'm worth it." He looked up then, pain flickering in his gaze, but he didn't answer. I walked away, the door's chime echoing behind me, feeling the thread between us fraying, unsure if it could hold. The silence between Eli and me stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. I'm Liam, 28, a bartender who's always lived loud. But the quiet after Eli pulled away cut deeper than any city I'd left behind. Austin's pulsates, neon nights, and buzzing streets felt hollow without him. At 32, Eli had been my steady ground. But now, he was a ghost in his own driveway. His truck parked, but his presence gone. I fought too hard to be myself to let someone else's fear dim me. But the ache of his absence burned. Days bled into a week, each one heavier. I threw myself into work, pouring drinks with a smile that didn't reach my chest. I rode my motorcycle alone. The back roads we'd shared now, just empty stretches. I'd see his porch light flicker on, but no knock came at my door. My texts went unanswered or worse, met with short replies. Busy. Talk soon. I wanted to believe him, but the sting of his withdrawal felt like betrayal. Like I'd been a risk he wasn't ready to take. One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I marched across the street, gravel crunching under my boots, and knocked on his door, heart pounding. He opened it, posture stiff, like he'd been bracing for this. "We need to talk," said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The air between us was thick, charged with everything unsaid. "If you're ashamed of me, just say it." Eli's jaw tightened, hands shoving into his pockets. "It's not you," he said, voice low, afraid. "It's never been you." I crossed my arms, holding his gaze. "Then why are you hiding from me?" "From us?" He paced a step, then stopped, shoulders slumping. "That photo. Everyone saw it. My crew, my dad there, talking. Liam, I feel their looks at work. My dad called. I said I'm throwing my life away." His voice cracked just enough to show the weight he'd been carrying. I stepped closer, anger mixing with hurt. "I've spent years fighting to be seen," I said, voice sharp but steady. "Kicked out at 17, told I was wrong for who I am. I can't go back to shrinking myself, Eli. Not for you. Not for anyone." His eyes met mine, raw and searching. He reached for my hand, but I pulled back. The distance between us was a chasm I wasn't ready to cross. "I need someone who's all in," I said, turning to leave. "Figure out if that's you." The next few days blurred into long shifts and solitary rides. I told myself I could move on, that I'd survived worse than a broken heart. But every quiet moment brought him back the way his hand steadied mine. The warmth of his laugh, the promise of something real. I hated how much I missed him, how much I still wanted him to show up. Then one night a knock came. I opened my door to find Eli standing there, hands shoved deep in his pockets, breath uneven. "I want to see my dad," he said, voice rough but sure. Told him I'm done hiding. Told him I'm not ashamed of who I am or who I'm with. I leaned against the doorframe, chest tight, waiting. He didn't take it well at first. But then, his gaze held steady. "I'm no son of his," he said, but I walked away knowing I chose myself. "And I choose you, Liam." I studied him, searching for the caution I'd seen before. It was still there, but softer, like a shadow fading in the light. "You mean it?" I asked, voice quieter now. He stepped closer, hand reaching for mine. This time, I let him take it. His grip was warm, firm like he was holding on for good. "I'm scared," he admitted. "But I'm here. I want this. Us." I didn't trust it fully. Yet. I'd been burned before by people who promised more than they could give. But his eyes held something new, a resolve that hadn't been there before. "Okay," I said, squeezing his hand back. "No more running." He nodded, thumb brushing over my knuckles, a silent promise. We sat on my steps, night air cool between us. He told me about the drive to his father's house, the words he'd rehearsed, the way his dad's silence had hurt more than any shouting could. I shared my own scars, nights spent sleeping in my car after being kicked out, the years spent building walls to keep people out. We didn't solve everything that night, but we truly talked for the first time in weeks. His hand stayed in mine, steady, and for the first time, I felt like he was choosing to stay not just for me, but for himself. The air between Eli and me started to breathe again, but it wasn't the same. I'm Liam, 28, a bartender who's always lived loud. And Eli, 32, the contractor who'd become my steady ground, had shaken that foundation when he pulled away. After his stand against his father choosing me and himself, I wanted to believe we could rebuild. But trust, once cracked, takes time to mend. We were learning how to show up without the weight of old fears. We started small. Eli came by the next morning with coffee, sitting on my steps as the sun broke through Austin's haze. His hand rested near mine, not quite touching, as if waiting for permission. I meant what I said, he told me, voice low but firm. I'm not running anymore. I nodded, sipping my coffee, letting his words settle. I wasn't ready to dive back in fully, but I let him stay. Let us talk. Let the quiet moments stitch us back together. Our rides resumed, slower at first. I took my motorcycle, Eli, in his truck, trailing through back roads where the city's noise couldn't reach. We'd stop at familiar spots, like the clearing where we'd first shared drinks, sitting on his tailgate, knees brushing. He was different, now less guarded, laughter quicker. He started joining me at the gym, lifting weights beside me, trading grins with my coworkers who welcomed him without question. At a taco stand one night, he reached for my hand across the table. Grip steady, even when a stranger's glance lingered. Let them look, he said, voice calm. And I felt my chest loosen instead of unraveling, but the world didn't let go easily. Eli's crew at work, Splitsum, stayed friendly. Others kept their distance, silence louder than words. His father never called again, and I saw the weight of that in the way Eli's hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. Some days, I carried my own scars, 2 memories of being kicked out at 17, cities that never felt like home. We didn't pretend it was easy, but we faced it together. One evening, I found him working on his truck, tools scattered across the driveway. I handed him a cold drink, leaning nearby. You okay? I asked, noticing his quiet. He nodded, setting down a wrench. Just miss how things used to be sometimes. But I'd rather be here with you than go back. The turning point came. When we found a small house for sale on one of our rides, tucked off a quiet road, its yard shaded by a sprawling oak. We weren't looking, but we stopped, drawn to its promise of space. Could be ours, Eli said, voice testing the idea. We walked the property, imagining mornings on the porch, a place where our lives could root. We didn't buy it yet, I said. Not yet, he smiled. But it became a quiet dream, something we'd talk about over coffee. Sketching plans for a future we both wanted, Eli started showing up in bigger ways. He met my friends at a local bar, laughing through their stories, hand resting on my shoulder without hesitation. At a community cookout, he introduced me as his partner, the word landing soft but sure. Caleb, his old friend, came around too, apologizing for his earlier jab with a handshake and a beer. You're good for him, he told me. Eli's grinned wide and unguarded said he agreed. One night, after a long ride, sat under the stars at our clearing, the air cool, the hum of crickets filling the silence. Eli pulled a small key from his pocket, edges worn smooth. This is for the garage, he said, pressing it into my hand. Not just a spare. It's yours. This life is home. It's ours. I closed my fingers around the key, its weight grounding me. I've been home with you for a while, I said, voice steady. He smiled, hand finding mine, fingers locking tight. We weren't perfect. Some days work pulled Eli away, his long hours leaving me waiting. Other days my restlessness pushed me to ride alone, needing space to sort my thoughts. But we always came back. Coffee shared at dawn, hands brushing in the dark. Promises kept in the small ways that mattered. The house we'd seen stayed in our plans, a goal we were saving for. A symbol of what we were building under that oak tree. With Eli's hand in mine, I knew I'd stopped running. We found our place not just in Austin, but in each other.